Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoterica. We got a fun and really random episode for you guys this Friday because I've acquired another Konami PCB, and if you've been following along the channel, you know I love these things. And this is the last Konami arcade board they ever released before they switched over to specifically PC parts in a box like pretty much every other game developer. But this is an exceedingly rare PCB, and if you know what it is, you'll understand. But if you've seen it before and think it's actually easy to find, that's technically true as well, but it's going to be a little bit of a story. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor, go down below, hit like and subscribe. That notification bell definitely helps us out. If you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But the reason why this is such a funny piece of hardware is because underneath this gigantic shell, it is just a full-fat PlayStation 2 in a gigantic box. This is not an arcade board so much as it is a conversion of a stock PlayStation 2 with a little bit of a BIOS change and some encryption on the hard drive. Now the reason this board is so rare is because it's actually a Konami Python 2 Thrill Drive 3 board. Now the Konami Python 2 had a bunch of games on it, stuff like Bemani and DDR, and that is technically a different board. Konami released one and only one game not in the music rhythm genre, and that is Thrill Drive 3. And the boards are basically identical with slight visual changes, but the thing is you can convert any of these Thrill Drive 3 boards to being any sort of DDR or Bemani game you want them to be, which means that like 95% of these things seem to have been sacrificed to repair or convert music boards. But it's so much so a PlayStation 2 on the top of the disc, it even has that Magic Gate sticker on it just randomly sitting there. Now how did I know this was a Thrill Drive 3 and not anything Bemani? That is because you'll see this little sticker here, D44JA302. Konami loves to abbreviate all of their games, and if you know what those abbreviations mean, you can determine what type of game you're looking at. If we go over to the test menu from Thrill Drive 3, you're going to see G*D44. That is the game code, and that is how you identify what you're looking at. D44 is a Thrill Drive. But let's take a look at the front because it's really interesting how Konami managed to convert this over. You have a power port right there, and then you also have an analog port as well, but you have port 1 and port 2, which can be fully utilized for all of those DDR games. You have a LAN controller as well, just a little Ethernet plug, and a JAMA Edge that practically does nothing except powers the I/O and delivers a few buttons. You got a couple of COM ports, and then you're getting 15 kilohertz RGB off of the board with stereo out. Now you can do 15 kilohertz or 31 kilohertz depending on how you set it up, but it is just that VGA port delivering RGB. But I love how easily they did this. They just basically cut a PlayStation 2 power cord and wired it through the front, so much so that I just plug in a standard cord and plug this PlayStation 2 directly into the wall, and it works perfectly fine. And you'll see this analog port right here. That is the most important thing on the entire board, because we can put pretty much any sort of controller we want in here and calibrate it in the test menu. It gives us all of the options we need to control this with any sort of steering wheel we want, and because it's an arcade game, we get all of those game options as well. It's just so much fun to have something like this. Although I will say they're not the easiest thing to set up, and I am working on a tutorial on kind of a universal arcade board setup. But you'll see here, this is the current situation on this. It works. I'm just finishing this setup. It's on the floor, and because of that RGB 15 kilohertz out, the color space is a little weird on my monitor, so I'm still working on converting this over into something that's actually going to be a little less yellow, but that's just kind of part and parcel of using 15 kilohertz RGB off a PlayStation 2. But when this thing came in, it was basically in pristine condition outside of a little bit of dust, and usually I leave things dusty on the channel, but I figured today let's just give it a little bit of a face, and then we'll just clean it off just to make sure this is preserved, because this is not the type of board you're going to be finding every single day. It is rare, and it is difficult to find, and it could use a little bit of love, and you'll see that sticker slightly peeling, and the hilarious part is that just covers the PlayStation 2 logo. I don't know what Konami was trying to hide right there, but they wanted you to not know it was a PlayStation 2, even though it's pretty painfully obvious. And you can still feel the PlayStation 2 logo indent underneath this sticker here, and then there's some warning in Japanese, which I have absolutely no idea what it says, but it probably says you overpaid for this, because these sold for multiple thousands of dollars as cabinets, and it's probably about $100 extra versus a retail PlayStation PlayStation 2. But it's also just hilarious how they've built this thing. All of the control wiring just goes into this board and connects to the front of the PlayStation 2 via one USB lead. That second one just grounds out. It is not using the controller ports, it's not using the memory cards, and there's nothing in the disk drive. This all runs off an encrypted hard drive. But this is maybe the simplest and bodgiest looking setup I have ever seen. It's just cut cords in some instances, but we'll get into that shortly. On the side, you're going to see some dips here, and if you're going to set it up outside of an arcade cabinet, dip 2 is what you need to have on. And then you have these two very strange looking plugs, well, unless you were around in the 80s and 90s with the computers and they don't look strange. But these require a security key. Plug 1 is your security key. Plug 2 would be to get onto the Konami network to upload high scores if that feature was enabled. But that also says GMD44, and that's another way I knew what this board was. Once you start learning what to look for with Konami, you start realizing it's kind of easy to find what you're looking for if you know the codes. I have absolutely no idea what's in this thing. I'm just assuming a very small surface mounted chip, but I'm not taking it apart because it's not easy, and without this the board will not currently run, so I'm not going to just be dismantling that. But I just absolutely love what the engineers at Konami did here. They made this as simple as possible. Every single control comes in bare wire into pins, and a small controller chip just converts it over to the USB protocol into the front of the PlayStation 2, and that gives you full analog driving controls for Thrill Drive 3 and all of the different button inputs you would need for any of the Bemani or DDR games. It is a very elegant solution, and it's also a very cheap solution because it's probably honestly like $50 worth of parts on top of the cost of a PlayStation 2. Now these games run completely off encrypted hard drives, and the decryption key is on that security dongle I showed you. Now you can back your hard drive up in case it fails, but the hard drive is married to the security key. You can't just have any hard drive, you have to have your own. If it fails, the board's not going to boot. But luckily, some other modders have taken all the images off of these and decrypted them, so there is a hard drive image that allows you to restore a Thrill Drive 3 installation, and you don't need to have the security key, you just need to have any security key in the first port. It just checks for the presence, not for the code. So luckily this is pretty well reserved, but I'm going to make sure that I back up my hard drive, that way I can keep it on an original instance, just because there's not many of these running around anymore, and honestly, why not do that? Just because it's fun and I love doing strange things. But again, the setup of this board is just hilarious, because if you take a look here, you're going to see that standard optical audio cable, and then you're going to have the multi-AV out underneath it. And what did the engineers at Konami do? They just cut that cable, literally took the leads out of it, and jammed it into this I/O board. It is a retail PlayStation 2 video cable that's just been cut and spliced. And then you just have some stereo in and outs, and then you have those two dongle ports for the security ports. But this is literally just cutting cables apart and jamming them into different places. And this is probably the most heavily built and secured PlayStation 2 in the world, because that is not soldered, that is tack welded into place with that bracket. You could take this PlayStation 2 to the apocalypse and probably come out with a working model. But again, it's just exceedingly rare. It is very, very difficult to find original Thrill Drive 3 boards. I've been looking for over a year, and I finally got lucky on Yahoo Auctions Japan, and I paid the sum total of $99 for this because it was untested and the seller didn't know what it was. And the reason, like I said again, it's so rare is the Bemani Python 2 hardware looks absolutely identical to a standard Python 2, and that is because it basically is identical in its appearance, showing you again right here. And here's all the games that ran on the Bemani Python 2, which means these are all the games that you can convert a Thrill Drive 3 board to run. And since the music rhythm genre collector loves these things, and I understand why, it is a big category, a lot of the Thrill Drive 3 boards have been converted to run all of these games. Where if we take a look at the Python 2, the non-Bemani variant, you're going to see it runs one game only, and that is Thrill Drive 3. And what a game it is. Konami made a ton of games in the arcade for the PlayStation 2, and they were all music-based, and they decided to make one variant board with one non-rhythm game, and that game is Thrill Drive 3, and it just happens to be one of my favorite racing franchises of all time. And now that I have this board in my collection, it's going to live out its days as a Thrill Drive 3. Nothing against music rhythm games, I just want to keep this thing stock. And don't forget, this isn't that weird. Sony also put a PlayStation 2 in a giant box and sold it for a ton of money, so the fact that Konami did it, not that strange, although it is pretty funny. And the most hilarious thing is, that PlayStation 2, identical hardware. It's a weird board, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.